The fulfillment of the promise, when hope entered time. The promise humanity had carried for generations did not arrive with warning. There was no global announcement. No royal decree declaring fulfillment. No sudden end to suffering or violence. Redemption came quietly. Exactly as hope often does. Not the arrival humanity expected. After centuries of waiting, humanity had imagined many versions of redemption. Some expected power that would crush enemies. Some expected wisdom that would silence doubt. Some expected authority that would rule without resistance. But God did something far deeper. He did not send redemption from above humanity. He sent it into humanity. The promise spoken in Eden, that an offspring of the woman would confront and defeat evil, was fulfilled not through domination, but through incarnation. Hope took on flesh. Eternity stepped into time. The Creator entered His creation. Redemption did not arrive as force. It arrived as presence. Why redemption came this way? Humanity's greatest wound was not weakness, it was separation. So God did not remain distant. He entered the brokenness fully. He experienced hunger, weariness, sorrow, rejection. Redemption was not delivered through command alone, it was lived out through obedience, compassion, and surrender. This fulfilled the heart of the original promise. Evil would wound, but not prevail. Pain would touch redemption, but not defeat it. Death would appear victorious, but only briefly. The serpent's ancient strategy, doubt, deception, separation, was confronted not with argument, but with truth lived perfectly. Where Adam failed in abundance, redemption succeeded in lack. Where Adam grasped, redemption surrendered. Where Adam hid, redemption stepped forward openly. Healing the deeper damage. The fulfillment of the promise did not simply address sin as rule-breaking, it addressed sin as relational rupture. Redemption restored what was broken at the core. Shame was answered with acceptance. Fear was answered with peace. Distance was answered with closeness. God did not just forgive humanity, He welcomed it back into relationship. This was Eden restored in a deeper form. Not a return to innocence, but a transformation into trust. Victory through wounding. The ancient promise spoke of a wounded heel and a crushed head. Fulfillment followed that pattern exactly. Redemption was not untouched by suffering. Pain came first. Loss came first. Darkness seemed to have its moment. But what looked like defeat became victory. What appeared final became the doorway to restoration. Evil struck, but lost its authority. Death appeared powerful, but lost its permanence. The serpent was not silenced by force, it was undone by obedience, truth, and love. What changed because the promise was fulfilled? Human history shifted quietly but permanently. Hope was no longer just anticipated, it was anchored. Faith was no longer waiting, it was responding. Redemption was no longer distant, it was present. Humanity no longer waited for God to come near. God was already near. The fulfillment of the promise did not end struggle immediately, but it changed its meaning. Suffering was no longer pointless. Death was no longer final. Brokenness was no longer hopeless. The story that began with a fall in a garden now pointed toward restoration beyond it. From Eden to fulfillment, and beyond. The promise that began with whispered hope in Eden found its fulfillment through self-giving love. God did not reclaim humanity through fear, but through grace. He did not force trust, he earned it. The long wait was over. But the story was not finished. Because fulfillment opened the door to invitation. Humanity was now called not just to remember Eden, but to live redeemed, choosing trust where doubt once ruled, love where fear once lived, hope where despair once settled. What was lost through one choice was restored through faithful surrender. The promise had entered time. And the world would never be the same again. The fulfillment of the promise did not break into history like thunder. It arrived like a whisper. After centuries of waiting, after faith had been stretched thin by silence, exile, failure, and longing, redemption entered the world in the most unexpected way possible. Not as a spectacle. Not as a conqueror. Not as a ruler demanding allegiance. But as presence. Hope steps into human fragility. Humanity had imagined redemption as something powerful enough to erase pain instantly. Yet God understood something humanity did not. The deepest wound was not suffering, it was separation. So redemption did not remain distant. God did not shout from heaven. He did not send instructions from afar. He came near. Hope entered time clothed in human weakness. It learned hunger. It felt exhaustion. It experienced joy and grief. Redemption did not float above pain, it walked straight into it. This was the reversal of Eden. Where humanity once reached upward in distress, God now stepped downward in love. Why fulfillment took this form? The serpent's strategy in Eden had not been brute force. It had been subtlety, distortion of truth, erosion of trust, separation from God. To undo this, redemption had to do more than overpower evil, it had to heal trust. Truth was not merely spoken, it was lived. Where humanity doubted God's goodness, redemption revealed it. Where humanity hid in shame, redemption stood exposed. Where humanity chose self-rule, redemption chose surrender. This was not weakness. It was strength of a different kind. Obedience where Adam failed. In Eden, Adam stood in abundance and doubted. In fulfillment, redemption stood in lack and trusted. Where Adam grasped at what was not given, redemption released what was rightfully his. Where Adam sought knowledge apart from God, redemption walked in perfect union with him. Where Adam's choice fractured humanity, redemption's obedience began to restore it. This was the second turning point of history. Not a return to innocence, but a transformation through trust. The wounded heal, the crushed head. The ancient promise spoke of victory through suffering. And fulfillment followed that pattern precisely. Redemption was wounded. Pain was real. Loss was heavy. Darkness seemed, for a moment, to prevail. But this suffering was not defeat, it was the path through which victory would come. Evil did not understand what it was doing. In striking redemption, it exhausted its own power. In attempting to destroy hope, it exposed its own emptiness. What looked like loss became triumph. What appeared final became the beginning of restoration. The serpent's authority was broken not by domination, but by truth, obedience, and self-giving love. What changed when the promise was fulfilled? The fulfillment of the promise did not remove all suffering overnight, but it changed reality at its core. Shame lost its grip. Fear lost its voice. Death lost its finality. Humanity was no longer waiting for God to come close. God had already come close. The distance created in Eden began to close, not by erasing humanity's past, but by redeeming it. Humanity was invited not just to be forgiven, but to be restored. Not merely spared judgment, but welcomed into relationship. This was Eden transformed. Not a garden guarded by innocence, but a relationship secured by grace. From fulfillment to invitation. The promise was fulfilled, but the story did not end. Fulfillment opened a door rather than closing a chapter. Humanity was now invited to live differently, to choose trust over doubt, humility over pride, love over fear. The ancient question of Eden, will you trust God? Was answered by redemption itself. And now, that answer stood before humanity, inviting response. History pivoted quietly, but permanently. The fall had bent humanity inward. Fulfillment opened it outward again. What was lost through one act of distrust was restored through faithful surrender. The meaning of fulfillment. The fulfillment of the promise teaches a truth humanity still needs to hear. God did not come to condemn brokenness. He came to heal it. Redemption did not erase scars, it gave them meaning. It did not deny suffering, it transformed it. It did not bypass humanity, it embraced it fully. Hope was no longer an idea. Hope had a heartbeat. And the long story that began in a garden, marked by choice, loss, waiting, and faith, had reached its turning point. The promise had entered time. And nothing, not doubt, not shame, not death, would ever hold the final word again. And so the waiting ended, not with noise, but with nearness. The promise humanity had carried for generations did not arrive to overwhelm the world. It arrived to enter it. Quietly, gently, faithfully. Hope did not erase the scars of history, it stepped into them and stayed. Nothing around the world changed all at once. Empires still ruled. Suffering still existed. Night still fell. Yet something unseen had shifted forever. What humanity had lost in Eden, closeness, trust, belonging, was no longer out of reach. God was no longer distant, no longer behind gates or symbols. He had stepped into time, into flesh, into the ache of human life. Hope was no longer an idea whispered across generations. It was a presence that could be touched. A truth that could be trusted. A love that refused to stay far away. The ancient wound had finally been answered, not with condemnation, but with compassion. Not with power imposed, but with love offered. The distance created by doubt began to close, step by step, heart by heart. The fall had spoken of failure. Fulfillment spoke of restoration. And in that moment, quiet, humble, easily missed by the world, the story turned. Humanity was no longer only remembering a promise. It was standing inside it. The long night had not been wasted. The waiting had not been in vain. Hope had arrived. Not to rush the story to its end, but to walk with humanity toward it. And from that moment forward, nothing would ever be the same. Because the God who once walked with humanity in a garden was walking with them again. Not behind them. Not above them. But beside them. The promise was fulfilled,